When my mother-in-law's hand connected with my face in front of 500 wedding guests, she thought she was humiliating me into silence about what I had discovered. What she didn't realize was that I had spent months documenting her secret affair with my brother's business partner, and her public assault had just given me the perfect opportunity to expose 20 years of lies to everyone who mattered in her carefully constructed social world. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The champagne flute trembled slightly in my hand as I watched my brother Daniel adjust his bow tie for the third time in 10 minutes, his nervous energy filling the bridal suite at the prestigious Grandview estate. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden rays across the marble floors of what would soon become the backdrop for one of the most dramatic confrontations of my life. My name is Sarah Matthias, and I had always prided myself on being the peacekeeper in our family, the one who smoothed over conflicts and maintained harmony even when tensions ran high. At 32, I had built a successful career as a forensic accountant, specializing in uncovering financial irregularities and hidden assets for high-profile divorce cases. The irony of what I was about to reveal using those same investigative skills would not be lost on me in the hours to come. The wedding was meant to be a celebration of new beginnings. Daniel, my younger brother by 4 years, was marrying Isabella Chen, a brilliant pediatric surgeon who had captured his heart during their residency at Johns Hopkins. Their love story was the kind that restored faith in authentic relationships, built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine partnership. Isabella brought out the best in Daniel, encouraging his artistic ambitions while supporting his decision to leave corporate law and pursue documentary filmmaking. The guest list represented the convergence of two accomplished families. Isabella's parents had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1980s and built a successful import business that now employed over 200 people. They had instilled in their daughter the values of hard work, education, and service to others that had shaped her into one of the most respected physicians in her field. Daniel had found in Isabella's family the warmth and acceptance that had sometimes been missing from our own upbringing. Our mother-in-law, Victoria Matthias, had orchestrated much of the wedding planning, with the precision of a military campaign and the budget of a small corporation. At 58, she commanded attention in any room she entered, her silver hair always perfectly styled, her wardrobe consisting exclusively of designer pieces that announced her social status to anyone who understood such signals. Victoria had married into wealth when she wed our father 35 years earlier, transforming herself from a middle-class secretary into a prominent socialite who served on multiple charity boards and hosted events that regularly appeared in the society pages. The relationship between Victoria and me had always been complex, characterized by her subtle disapproval of my career choices and lifestyle decisions. She had never explicitly stated her disappointment that I had chosen professional success over marriage and children, but her comments carried implications that were impossible to ignore. Every family gathering included questions about my dating life, suggestions about suitable men from prominent families, and observations about my biological clock that were delivered with the sharp precision of surgical instruments. Victoria's treatment of Isabella had been markedly different from her approach to my previous relationships. She had immediately embraced Daniel's fiancé, praising her accomplishments, her family background, and her obvious devotion to our family. This acceptance had surprised me initially, given Victoria's historical pattern of finding fault with anyone who threatened to claim her children's primary loyalty. I had attributed her enthusiasm to Isabella's professional status and her family's financial success, assuming that these factors outweighed Victoria's usual territorial instincts. The wedding preparations had consumed the better part of a year, with Victoria taking charge of arrangements that exceeded even her usual standards for elegance and extravagance. The Grandview estate had been reserved 18 months in advance, its grounds meticulously landscaped to provide the perfect backdrop for photographs that would undoubtedly appear in multiple publications. The catering contract alone exceeded the cost of most people's entire weddings, featuring a menu designed by a James Beard award-winning chef and wine selections curated by a master sommelier. 500 guests had been invited to witness the ceremony and celebration, representing a cross-section of business leaders, medical professionals, political figures, and social influencers whose presence would cement the event's status as one of the season's most significant gatherings. Victoria had spent months coordinating seating arrangements, ensuring that each table reflected careful consideration of professional relationships, social hierarchies, and potential networking opportunities. My role in the wedding preparations had been deliberately minimized, ostensibly to allow me to focus on my demanding career while Victoria handled the details that required her expertise in social planning. I had been assigned responsibility for coordinating the bachelor and bachelorette parties, arranging transportation for out-of-town guests, and managing the rehearsal dinner logistics. These tasks kept me busy, without giving me significant influence over the primary event planning or budget decisions. The restriction of my involvement had initially felt like a relief, given my busy work schedule and lack of enthusiasm for the social politics that Victoria navigated with such skill. However, as the months progressed, I began to notice patterns in her behavior that triggered my professional instincts for identifying hidden information and deceptive practices. Victoria's attention to detail, which had always been meticulous, had become obsessive regarding certain aspects of the wedding planning, while remaining surprisingly careless about others. The first anomaly I noticed involved the selection of vendors and service providers. Victoria had insisted on hiring specific photographers, florists, and entertainment companies, despite the availability of equally qualified alternatives at significantly lower costs. Her explanations for these choices focused on quality and reputation, but my research revealed that several of the preferred vendors had limited experience with events of this magnitude and scope. More concerning was Victoria's handling of the financial arrangements for these services. She had insisted on managing all payments personally, rather than allowing Daniel and Isabella to handle their own wedding expenses, despite their offers to contribute significantly to the costs. This control extended to requiring that all vendor communications be directed through her rather than the couple, creating an unusual level of intermediation that seemed unnecessary given the straightforward nature of most wedding planning tasks. The pattern that ultimately captured my professional attention involved Victoria's frequent meetings with James Caldwell, Daniel's business partner in their new documentary production company. James had invested substantially in their venture, providing both capital and industry connections that were crucial for their success. His involvement in their business was legitimate and necessary, but his presence at wedding planning meetings seemed excessive given his role as merely a groomsman and business associate. Victoria's explanation for James's involvement centered on his experience with event planning through his previous work in entertainment marketing. She argued that his insights were valuable for managing the media attention and publicity opportunities that the wedding would generate. This reasoning was plausible, but felt insufficient to justify the frequency and duration of their private consultations. My suspicions were further aroused by changes in Victoria's behavior and schedule that coincided with the intensification of wedding planning activities. She had always maintained a busy social calendar, but her new commitment seemed to require longer absences from home and less detailed explanations about her destinations and companions. Her explanations were consistent but vague, focusing on wedding-related errands and vendor meetings that could not be verified without appearing intrusive or suspicious. The transformation in Victoria's appearance and demeanor provided additional evidence that something significant was occurring in her life. Her wardrobe had become more youthful and fashion-forward, featuring styles and colors that departed from her typically conservative choices. Her fitness routine had intensified, resulting in visible weight loss and improved muscle tone that she attributed to stress management and preparation for the wedding photographs. These changes might have been attributed to the normal pressures and excitement associated with planning a major family event, but their timing and extent suggested influences beyond typical wedding stress. Victoria's energy levels had increased noticeably, and her mood had become more volatile, swinging between euphoric enthusiasm and sharp irritability without apparent external triggers. The investigation that would ultimately lead to my shocking discovery began almost by accident, when I offered to help Victoria organize her wedding planning documents and receipts for tax purposes. My forensic accounting background had taught me to maintain detailed financial records, and I assumed that Victoria would appreciate assistance in organizing the substantial expenses associated with the event. Victoria's reaction to my offer was surprisingly defensive, insisting that her record-keeping system was adequate and that my assistance was unnecessary. This response was inconsistent with her usual willingness to delegate tasks and accept help from family members. Her reluctance to share financial information seemed particularly unusual given that she had previously consulted me about tax strategies and investment decisions. The defensive response intensified my curiosity about what Victoria might be attempting to conceal. My professional experience had taught me that people who resist reasonable requests for transparency often have specific reasons for maintaining privacy that extend beyond general preferences for independence or control. I began paying closer attention to Victoria's activities and communications, not with any intention of invading her privacy, but rather to understand whether her behavior indicated problems that might affect our family or the wedding celebration. This observation was conducted discreetly and respectfully, focusing on publicly available information and family interactions, rather than intrusive surveillance or privacy violations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The evidence that emerged from this careful observation would ultimately reveal a situation far more complex and damaging than I had initially suspected, setting the stage for the confrontation that would occur on Daniel and Isabella's wedding day. Victoria's carefully constructed facade was beginning to show cracks that would soon expand into complete exposure, forever altering our family's dynamics and social standing. As I stood in the bridal suite that morning, watching Daniel prepare for what should have been the happiest day of his life, I carried with me knowledge that could destroy the celebration and shatter relationships that had taken decades to build. The weight of this information felt crushing, but I had not yet decided whether revealing the truth would serve justice or merely satisfy my own sense of moral outrage. The decision about how to handle what I had discovered would be made for me within hours, when Victoria's actions would force my hand and create circumstances that made silence impossible to maintain. The slap that would echo through the reception hall would be heard by 500 guests, but the revelation that followed would resonate far beyond that single moment, changing everything we thought we knew about truth, loyalty, and the price of maintaining family secrets. The morning sun continued to stream through those elegant windows as I prepared to witness either the preservation of carefully maintained lies or the explosive revelation of truths that some people would do anything to keep hidden. The foundation of my complicated relationship with Victoria Matthias had been established long before I possessed the professional skills to recognize the warning signs that would eventually expose her carefully guarded secrets. My journey to becoming a forensic accountant began during my sophomore year at Northwestern University, when a professor's lecture about financial fraud investigation opened my eyes to the fascinating world of hidden money trails and deliberately obscured transactions. Professor Elizabeth Harmon had spent 20 years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation before transitioning to academia, bringing with her a wealth of real-world experience that transformed abstract accounting principles into compelling detective stories. Her course on forensic financial analysis attracted students from multiple disciplines, but I found myself particularly drawn to the psychological aspects of financial deception and the methodical process of uncovering truth through careful examination of seemingly routine documents and transactions. The skills I developed under Professor Harmon's guidance extended far beyond traditional accounting techniques. I learned to recognize patterns in human behavior that often accompanied financial irregularities, to identify inconsistencies that might indicate deliberate concealment, and to construct comprehensive narratives from fragmentary evidence scattered across multiple sources. These capabilities would prove invaluable throughout my professional career, but I never anticipated that they would become essential tools for navigating my own family dynamics. After graduation, I joined Morrison, Chen & Associates, a prestigious forensic accounting firm that specialized in high-net-worth divorce cases and corporate fraud investigations. The work was intellectually challenging and financially rewarding, requiring me to analyze complex financial structures while testifying in court proceedings where my findings could determine the distribution of millions of dollars in disputed assets. The most significant aspect of my professional development involved learning to maintain objectivity while investigating people whose lives would be fundamentally altered by my discoveries. Divorce cases often revealed the most intimate details of failed relationships, including financial infidelity, hidden assets, and deliberate attempts to deceive spouses about the true extent of family wealth or debt. My role required clinical detachment from the emotional drama, while maintaining empathy for all parties affected by the dissolution of marriages and families. This professional experience provided crucial preparation for recognizing similar patterns in my personal life, though I initially resisted applying investigative techniques to family relationships. The boundary between professional skepticism and personal trust had always been carefully maintained, allowing me to preserve faith in the people I loved while exercising appropriate caution in my work environment. Victoria's integration into our family had occurred when I was still in high school, too young to fully appreciate the social and financial dynamics that shaped her relationship with my father. Richard Matthias had established himself as one of the region's most successful commercial real estate developers, building a portfolio of office buildings, shopping centers, and residential complexes that generated substantial passive income and provided the foundation for our family's comfortable lifestyle. The courtship between Victoria and my father had been relatively brief but intense, characterized by elaborate romantic gestures and expensive gifts that seemed designed to demonstrate his financial capacity, rather than express genuine affection. Victoria had responded enthusiastically to these displays of wealth, quickly establishing herself as an essential component of my father's social and professional life. Their marriage had been celebrated as a union between two accomplished individuals who could enhance each other's status and influence within their respective social circles. Victoria brought connections to cultural institutions and charitable organizations that complemented my father's business network, while his financial resources provided her with the security and social position that she had always desired. The adjustment to having a stepmother had been challenging for both Daniel and me, particularly because Victoria's approach to family relationships seemed to prioritize appearance and social acceptability over emotional intimacy or unconditional support. She maintained detailed awareness of our academic performance, extracurricular activities, and social associations, but her interest felt more like quality control than genuine maternal concern. Victoria's relationship with our father appeared stable and mutually beneficial throughout my college years and early career development. They traveled extensively, entertained frequently, and maintained separate but complementary social calendars that maximized their visibility within the community's elite circles. Their marriage seemed to function as a successful business partnership disguised as a romantic relationship, providing both parties with the status and security they desired. The first indication that this arrangement might be less stable than it appeared came during my father's 60th birthday celebration 3 years ago. Victoria had organized an elaborate party at their country club, inviting over 200 guests to celebrate what she described as a milestone worthy of special recognition. The event was flawlessly executed, featuring live entertainment, premium catering, and decorations that created an atmosphere of sophisticated elegance. However, I noticed during the celebration that Victoria seemed distracted and anxious despite the success of her planning efforts. She moved through the crowd with her usual social grace, but her smiles appeared forced, and her conversation lacked the sharp wit that typically characterized her interactions with friends and associates. When I approached her to compliment the arrangements, she responded with uncharacteristic nervousness, deflecting praise while scanning the room as if searching for someone specific. James Caldwell had been present at the birthday celebration in his capacity as a business associate who had recently begun collaborating with Daniel on documentary projects. At 45, James possessed the kind of rugged attractiveness that attracted attention without appearing calculated, combined with the confident charm of someone who had achieved success in a competitive industry. His background in entertainment marketing provided valuable expertise for Daniel's transition from law to filmmaking, making his involvement in our family's social events both natural and beneficial. The interaction between Victoria and James during the birthday party had seemed appropriately friendly but professionally distant, consistent with their roles as family member and business associate. However, my trained observation skills detected subtle signals that suggested a level of familiarity and comfort that exceeded what their official relationship would normally produce. Their conversations lasted longer than necessary for business purposes, included more personal topics than professional interactions typically encompassed, and featured body language that indicated mutual attraction despite their efforts to maintain appropriate boundaries. These observations troubled me because they suggested possibilities that could have devastating consequences for our family's stability and Daniel's professional development. If Victoria and James were developing inappropriate feelings for each other, the situation could create conflicts of interest that would affect both personal relationships and business partnerships in ways that might be impossible to resolve amicably. My initial response to these concerns involved increased attention to family dynamics without direct investigation or confrontation about my suspicions. I hoped that whatever attraction might exist between Victoria and James would either dissipate naturally or remain at levels that would not threaten existing relationships or create professional complications. However, as Daniel's wedding planning progressed and James's involvement in family activities increased, the evidence of inappropriate behavior became more substantial and difficult to ignore. Victoria's explanations for her activities and schedule began including more references to wedding-related meetings with James, and her emotional state seemed increasingly influenced by interactions with him rather than her husband or immediate family members. The professional ethics of my career required me to distinguish between legitimate concerns about family welfare and inappropriate intrusion into private matters that did not affect others. This balance became increasingly difficult to maintain as Victoria's behavior suggested problems that could ultimately harm people I cared about, particularly Daniel, whose business partnership with James represented his primary source of income and professional development. The decision to begin systematic documentation of Victoria's activities was not made lightly or with any intention of creating family conflict. Rather, it emerged from growing concern that her behavior indicated problems that might require intervention to prevent more serious consequences. My forensic training had taught me that financial and emotional infidelity often occurred together, and that hidden relationships frequently involved financial irregularities that could affect family assets and business operations. The investigation that followed would reveal information far more damaging than I had initially suspected, creating moral obligations that would ultimately force me to choose between family harmony and protection of people who had the right to know the truth about relationships that affected their own lives and futures. As Daniel's wedding day approached, I carried with me detailed documentation of discoveries that could destroy relationships, devastate business partnerships, and forever alter our family's social standing within the community, where reputation and appearance were valued above almost everything else. The question that haunted me was not whether the information I had gathered was accurate, but whether revealing it would serve justice or merely satisfy my own sense of moral superiority. The morning of the wedding, as I watched my brother prepare for what he believed would be the beginning of his happiest chapter, I realized that the events of the day would force me to make choices about truth, loyalty, and responsibility that would define my character and determine the course of multiple lives for years to come. The transformation from dutiful stepdaughter to determined investigator required me to confront fundamental questions about loyalty, truth, and the responsibilities that accompany knowledge of potentially damaging information. This internal evolution occurred gradually over several months as evidence accumulated and my understanding of Victoria's deception deepened, forcing me to examine my own values and determine what actions my conscience would ultimately demand. The process began with professional curiosity that gradually evolved into moral obligation as the scope of Victoria's betrayal became apparent. My forensic accounting background had taught me to approach investigations systematically, gathering evidence methodically while maintaining objectivity about potential outcomes. However, applying these techniques to family relationships created emotional complications that no professional training could adequately address. The ethical framework that guided my decision-making had been established through years of handling sensitive divorce cases, where my discoveries would fundamentally alter people's lives and financial circumstances. These experiences taught me that truth, while often painful, generally served the interests of justice better than continued deception, particularly when hidden behaviors affected innocent parties who deserved accurate information about their circumstances. My relationship with Daniel provided the strongest motivation for pursuing the investigation to its conclusion, despite the potential consequences for family harmony and social standing. As the older sister, I had always felt protective of his interests and supportive of his dreams, even when his choices diverged from conventional expectations about career development and financial security. Daniel's decision to leave his lucrative law practice and pursue documentary filmmaking had required considerable courage and financial sacrifice. His partnership with James Caldwell represented not merely a business arrangement but a fundamental investment in his creative vision and professional fulfillment. The success of their collaborative efforts would determine whether Daniel could sustain his artistic pursuits or would be forced to return to legal practice that provided financial security but limited personal satisfaction. The potential impact of Victoria's affair on Daniel's business relationship with James created professional stakes that extended beyond personal betrayal or family embarrassment. If their romantic involvement became public knowledge, the resulting conflict could destroy the partnership that formed the foundation of Daniel's new career. Worse yet, if financial irregularities accompanied the personal relationship, Daniel could face legal and professional consequences that would affect his ability to work in either entertainment or legal fields. My protective instincts toward Daniel were complicated by genuine affection and respect for Isabella, whose integration into our family represented a positive development that I hoped would provide emotional stability and happiness that had sometimes been lacking in our childhood. Isabella's dedication to her medical career and her obvious love for Daniel created a relationship dynamic that seemed healthy and mutually supportive, contrasting sharply with the transactional nature of many relationships within our social circle. The prospect of revealing information that could overshadow or disrupt Daniel and Isabella's wedding celebration created significant internal conflict about timing and methodology. Their happiness deserved protection from unnecessary drama, but they also deserved to make informed decisions about family relationships and business partnerships based on accurate rather than deceptive information. Victoria's treatment of me throughout our relationship provided additional motivation for pursuing the investigation, though I recognized that personal grievances should not drive decisions that would affect multiple people's lives. Her subtle but persistent criticism of my choices regarding career priorities, relationship status, and lifestyle decisions had created accumulated resentment that required careful management to prevent it from compromising my objectivity. The pattern of Victoria's disapproval had been consistent since my college years, focusing on my emphasis on professional achievement rather than traditional markers of feminine success, such as marriage and motherhood. Her comments were typically delivered with apparent concern for my happiness and future security, but they consistently implied that my priorities were misguided, and that my independence represented a character flaw rather than a conscious choice. This ongoing tension had shaped my interactions with Victoria in ways that made me more observant of her behavior and more skeptical of her motivations than I might otherwise have been. My professional training in recognizing deceptive practices had been reinforced by years of personal experience, with Victoria's ability to present false concern while pursuing her own agenda. The discovery process revealed character traits in myself that I had not previously recognized or been required to exercise. The patience and persistence necessary for thorough investigation required emotional discipline that extended beyond my professional experience into personal territory, where the stakes involved relationships and loyalties that could not be easily repaired if damaged. The systematic documentation of Victoria's activities demanded careful attention to ethical boundaries and legal considerations that became more complex when applied to family members rather than clients or opposing parties in litigation. I established strict guidelines for my investigation that prohibited invasion of privacy through illegal means, while allowing observation of public behavior and analysis of information that was freely shared or available through legitimate channels. These self-imposed limitations sometimes frustrated my desire for conclusive evidence, but they provided moral foundation for whatever actions I might ultimately take based on my discoveries. The integrity of the investigation process was essential for maintaining my own ethical standards and ensuring that any revelations would be based on legitimate evidence rather than speculation or personal bias. The emotional toll of conducting secret investigation into a family member's behavior created psychological stress that affected my sleep patterns, work performance, and social relationships outside the family. The burden of hidden knowledge became increasingly difficult to bear as evidence accumulated and the wedding date approached, particularly because I could not seek advice or support from friends or colleagues without violating confidentiality that Victoria deserved, despite her deceptive behavior. The isolation created by maintaining secrecy about the investigation forced me to rely entirely on my own judgment about complex moral and practical questions that would have benefited from outside perspectives. This independence strengthened my confidence in my analytical abilities while increasing the personal responsibility I felt for whatever outcomes might result from my eventual decisions. My professional reputation and career prospects also faced potential consequences depending on how I handled the situation and its aftermath. The forensic accounting field values discretion and professionalism above almost all other qualities, and any perception that I had misused investigative techniques for personal purposes could damage my credibility with clients and colleagues who relied on my objectivity and ethical standards. However, the same professional standards that created career risks also demanded action when evidence revealed behavior that could harm innocent parties or involved financial irregularities that affected business relationships. My obligation to protect Daniel's interests and ensure that Isabella entered marriage with accurate information about family dynamics created competing pressures that required careful consideration of both personal and professional ethical requirements. The development of my investigation skills during this period represented significant professional growth that would enhance my capabilities in future cases, despite the personal costs associated with their application to family circumstances. The experience taught me to maintain emotional equilibrium while processing disturbing information and to develop comprehensive understanding of complex relationship dynamics that involved financial and personal deception. The psychological preparation for eventual confrontation required me to anticipate various scenarios and develop strategies for managing reactions from family members who would be affected by revelations. This planning process forced me to confront my own motivations and ensure that my desire for truth was balanced by concern for minimizing unnecessary harm to people who had not chosen to be involved in Victoria's deceptive behavior. The strength I discovered through this process included not only analytical capabilities and investigative skills, but also emotional resilience and moral courage that would be tested during the confrontation that awaited. The knowledge that I possessed information capable of destroying relationships and reputations created tremendous pressure to find solutions that would serve justice without causing maximum damage to innocent parties. As Daniel's wedding day approached, I had evolved from a passive observer of family dynamics into an active participant who would be forced to make choices that could not be undone or modified based on their consequences. The weight of this responsibility felt crushing at times, but it also represented an opportunity to demonstrate the values and principles that defined my character and determined my approach to difficult ethical decisions. The morning of the wedding, as I prepared to witness what should have been a celebration of love and commitment, I carried with me not only damaging evidence about Victoria's betrayal, but also newfound understanding of my own capacity for courage, persistence, and moral action under challenging circumstances. The events that would unfold during the reception would test every aspect of this character development while determining whether my investigation had served worthy purposes or had simply satisfied personal desires for vindication and revenge. The external pressures that would ultimately force my hand began manifesting 6 weeks before the wedding, when Daniel approached me with concerns about financial irregularities in his business partnership with James Caldwell. The conversation took place in my downtown office, where Daniel had requested a meeting to discuss what he described as minor discrepancies in their company's financial statements that were causing him anxiety as their first major project neared completion. Daniel's documentary about urban education reform had attracted significant investor interest and pre-sale commitments from several streaming platforms, representing the kind of breakthrough success that could establish their production company as a serious player in the documentary film industry. The project's financial projections showed potential profits that would provide both partners with substantial returns on their initial investments, while funding future productions that could expand their creative and commercial reach. However, Daniel had noticed inconsistencies in expense reporting and budget allocations that seemed minor individually, but created patterns that troubled his naturally detail-oriented personality. James had assumed primary responsibility for financial management due to his background in entertainment business operations, but Daniel's legal training had taught him to review important documents carefully before signing agreements or approving expenditures. The specific concerns Daniel raised during our meeting involved expense categories that seemed excessive or poorly documented, including travel costs for business development meetings, equipment purchases that had not resulted in corresponding asset additions to their inventory, and consulting fees paid to vendors whose services Daniel could not clearly identify or verify. My initial analysis of the financial documents Daniel provided revealed irregularities that extended beyond simple bookkeeping errors or administrative oversights. The pattern suggested systematic diversion of funds through carefully constructed expense categories that would be difficult to detect without forensic examination, but represented significant amounts when accumulated over the 18-month partnership period. The most concerning discovery involved a series of payments to a consulting company called Strategic Media Solutions, which had allegedly provided market research and industry analysis services worth over $40,000 during the previous year. My investigation revealed that Strategic Media Solutions existed only as a shell corporation, with no visible operations, employees, or legitimate business activities beyond receiving payments from Daniel and James's production company. Further research into Strategic Media Solutions revealed that the company had been incorporated by James Caldwell using a registered agent service that obscured direct ownership while providing legal distance from the consulting payments. The company's business address corresponded to a commercial mail forwarding service, and its purported phone number connected to an automated voicemail system that provided no meaningful information about services or personnel. This discovery represented clear evidence of financial impropriety that violated both partnership agreements and legal requirements for business expense documentation. The diverted funds belonged partially to Daniel, whose investment and ongoing contributions entitled him to accurate accounting of partnership assets and expenditures. The deception also created potential tax liabilities and legal exposures that could affect both partners regardless of their individual involvement in the irregularities. The revelation about James's financial misconduct provided crucial context for understanding his relationship with Victoria, suggesting that their personal involvement might be accompanied by financial arrangements that could affect my father's assets or business interests. The pattern of deception that characterized James's business practices indicated a willingness to exploit trust and manipulate relationships for personal benefit that extended beyond simple romantic infidelity. My professional obligation to provide Daniel with complete information about his business partnership created immediate pressure to reveal discoveries that would inevitably lead to questions about my investigative methods and the sources of information that had enabled me to uncover the financial irregularities. This disclosure would expose my knowledge about Victoria's activities while forcing me to explain the extent of my investigation into family members' private affairs. The timeline pressure created by the approaching wedding intensified these challenges by limiting the time available for careful consideration of options and strategies. Daniel deserved to know about the financial problems before making additional commitments to the partnership, but revealing this information just weeks before his wedding would create tremendous stress during what should have been a happy and celebratory period. The situation was further complicated by James's integral role in the wedding celebration as a groomsman and his prominent position within our family's social circle through his business relationship with Daniel. Exposing his financial misconduct would create immediate conflict and potentially disrupt the wedding ceremony and reception that had required months of planning and substantial financial investment. Victoria's involvement in facilitating James's access to family events and business discussions added another layer of complexity to the situation. Her romantic relationship with him created potential conflicts of interest that might have influenced her support for his partnership with Daniel, raising questions about whether she had knowledge of the financial irregularities or had been manipulated by James to provide cover for his deceptive practices. The professional reputation I had built through years of discreet and effective investigation faced potential damage if my family investigation became public knowledge and was perceived as inappropriate use of forensic skills for personal purposes. Client relationships depended on trust, that I would maintain appropriate boundaries between professional capabilities and personal interests, and any perception of ethical violations could affect my ability to work in the forensic accounting field. However, the same professional standards that created reputation risks also demanded action when evidence revealed financial crimes that could affect innocent parties or involved violations of fiduciary duties that were clearly illegal. My obligation to report criminal activity extended beyond client relationships to include family members who were being victimized by deceptive practices that could result in significant financial losses. The documentation I had assembled about both Victoria's affair and James's financial misconduct represented hundreds of hours of careful investigation that had been conducted using legitimate research methods and publicly available information sources. The evidence was comprehensive and legally admissible, providing foundation for any legal actions that might become necessary to protect Daniel's interests or recover diverted funds. The psychological preparation for confronting these discoveries required me to anticipate various reaction scenarios and develop strategies for managing family dynamics that would be fundamentally altered by revelations about long-standing deception and betrayal. The emotional impact on family members would be severe regardless of how carefully the information was presented, creating lasting changes in relationships that had been built on trust and assumed honesty. My father's potential reaction to learning about Victoria's infidelity represented a particularly complex challenge, because his emotional and financial investment in their marriage was substantial, and the revelation could affect his health and well-being in ways that might be difficult to reverse. His business relationships and social standing would also face potential damage through association with the scandal that would inevitably follow public exposure of the affair. The impact on Isabella created additional moral considerations, because her entrance into our family would be overshadowed by revelations that could affect her perception of the relationships and dynamics she was joining through marriage to Daniel. Her medical career and professional reputation could face indirect consequences if the family scandal attracted media attention or created social difficulties within the communities where she practiced medicine. The broader implications for our family's social standing within the community required careful consideration, because Victoria's charitable work and social leadership roles connected our family reputation to institutions and causes that could be affected by scandal. The revelation could damage organizations that depended on Victoria's fundraising abilities and social connections, creating consequences that extended beyond immediate family members. The challenge of timing became increasingly acute as the wedding approached, and opportunities for private resolution of the issues diminished. The ideal outcome would involve confronting Victoria and James privately, allowing them opportunities to address the financial irregularities and end their affair before the wedding celebration brought additional family members and friends into proximity with ongoing deception. However, Victoria's defensive responses to previous indirect inquiries about her activities suggested that direct confrontation might result in denial, deflection, or escalation of deceptive practices rather than honest acknowledgement and corrective action. Her investment in maintaining the facade of respectability and social status created strong incentives for continued concealment rather than voluntary disclosure of damaging information. The external pressure created by Daniel's legitimate business concerns demanded immediate attention regardless of family considerations or social complications. His financial security and professional reputation were being actively damaged by James's misconduct, and delay in addressing these issues could result in additional losses that would be difficult to recover through legal action. The confluence of these various pressures created circumstances where continued silence about my discoveries would constitute complicity in ongoing harm to family members, who trusted me to act in their best interests. The professional and personal ethical standards that guided my career demanded action to protect innocent parties, even when such action would create conflict and disruption within family relationships. The development of contingency plans for various disclosure scenarios required me to consider not only immediate reactions but also long-term consequences for family relationships, business operations, and legal proceedings that might follow exposure of the financial irregularities and personal betrayals I had discovered. As the wedding week arrived, external circumstances had created a situation where my knowledge of Victoria's affair and James's financial misconduct could no longer remain private without causing continued harm to people I cared about. The choice was no longer whether to reveal what I had discovered, but rather how to manage the revelation in ways that would minimize unnecessary damage, while ensuring that truth and justice prevailed over deception and exploitation. The ethical framework that had guided my professional career faced its most challenging tests during the final weeks before Daniel's wedding, as the weight of my discoveries created internal conflicts that could not be resolved through the clear-cut principles that typically governed forensic accounting investigations. The intersection of family loyalty, professional obligation, and moral responsibility created competing demands that required careful examination of my deepest values and priorities. The sleepless nights began 3 weeks before the wedding, when the full implications of my evidence became undeniably clear, and the window for private resolution began closing rapidly. Each evening after completing my regular work responsibilities, I would return to my apartment and spread the documentation across my dining room table, searching for alternative interpretations that might reduce the severity of the situation or reveal options I had not previously considered. The financial evidence against James Caldwell was unambiguous and legally actionable, representing clear violations of partnership agreements and potential criminal fraud that could result in substantial financial penalties and imprisonment if prosecuted to the full extent of the law. His systematic diversion of business funds through the Strategic Media Solutions Shell Corporation demonstrated sophisticated planning and deliberate intent to defraud his partner, creating liability that extended beyond simple business disputes into criminal territory. The personal evidence regarding Victoria's affair with James was equally conclusive, documented through careful analysis of communication patterns, financial expenditures, and behavioral observations that created an undeniable pattern of deception spanning nearly 2 years. The timeline of their relationship coincided precisely with the period when James had been diverting funds from his partnership with Daniel, suggesting coordination between personal and financial betrayals that compounded the severity of both violations. The moral complexity of the situation emerged from the recognition that revealing this information would cause tremendous pain and disruption to people I cared about, potentially destroying relationships and opportunities that had taken years to develop. Daniel's happiness and professional future would be dramatically affected by the loss of his business partnership, while my father's emotional and financial well-being would suffer from the revelation of Victoria's infidelity and the associated social embarrassment. The timing considerations created additional ethical complications because the approaching wedding represented a celebration that hundreds of people had invested time, money, and emotional energy to attend. The guest list included professional associates, extended family members, and close friends whose presence at the event reflected their commitment to supporting Daniel and Isabella's future together. Disrupting this celebration with revelations about family scandals would affect far more people than just the immediate family members directly involved in the deceptive behavior. My professional training had always emphasized the importance of protecting innocent parties from unnecessary harm, while ensuring that justice prevailed over deception and exploitation. However, applying these principles to family relationships created ambiguities that were difficult to resolve through the objective analysis techniques that worked effectively in business and legal contexts. The question of loyalty presented particular challenges because Victoria's position as my stepmother created family obligations that might conflict with my professional responsibilities and moral convictions. Despite our complicated relationship history, she had been part of our family for over 15 years and had contributed to our social standing and financial security in ways that deserved acknowledgement and consideration. The potential consequences for Victoria herself required careful consideration, because exposure of her affair would likely result in divorce proceedings that could affect her financial security and social position within the community, where she had established her identity and influence. Her charitable work and board positions would face scrutiny that could damage organizations and causes that depended on her leadership and fundraising capabilities. James Caldwell's situation presented fewer moral complications, because his behavior represented clear violations of legal and ethical standards that were causing ongoing harm to my brother. His position as an outsider to our family reduced the loyalty considerations, while his financial crimes created urgent threats that demanded immediate attention, regardless of personal consequences he might face. The impact on Isabella created perhaps the most difficult moral dilemma, because she was entering our family with legitimate expectations about the relationships and dynamics she would encounter as Daniel's wife. Her professional reputation as a physician and her personal happiness as a new family member deserved protection from unnecessary exposure to scandal and conflict that preceded her involvement in our family's affairs. The broader implications for our family's reputation within the social and business communities, where we maintained important relationships, added another layer of complexity to the decision-making process. The scandal would inevitably attract media attention and public speculation that could affect business opportunities, social connections, and charitable activities that extended beyond the immediate family members. My own career prospects faced potential consequences depending on how I handled the situation and whether my investigation methods would be perceived as appropriate applications of professional skills or inappropriate invasions of family privacy. The forensic accounting field valued discretion and ethical behavior above technical competence, and any perception that I had misused investigative techniques for personal purposes could damage my reputation with clients and colleagues. The psychological burden of maintaining secrecy about my discoveries had begun affecting my work performance, personal relationships, and physical health in ways that made continued concealment increasingly difficult to sustain. The isolation created by my inability to seek advice or support from colleagues or friends intensified the pressure, while forcing me to rely entirely on my own judgment about complex moral questions that would benefit from outside perspectives. The analysis of potential outcomes revealed that every available course of action would create significant negative consequences for multiple people, making it impossible to identify solutions that would serve all competing interests satisfactorily. The choice became not whether to cause harm but rather how to minimize unnecessary damage while ensuring that the most important ethical principles were preserved and protected. The consideration of Daniel's right to know about his business partner's criminal behavior created the strongest argument for immediate disclosure, regardless of timing considerations or family complications. His financial investment in the partnership represented substantial personal savings and borrowed funds that were being systematically stolen through James's fraudulent expense reporting and shell corporation schemes. The professional ethics that governed my career demanded action to prevent continued financial crimes that were causing ongoing harm to my brother, while creating legal liabilities that could affect his ability to work in either the entertainment or legal fields. The duty to protect innocent parties from exploitation by criminals took precedence over considerations about family harmony or social embarrassment. The moral framework that had guided my personal relationships throughout my adult life emphasized honesty, integrity, and responsibility for protecting people who could not protect themselves from deception and exploitation. These values aligned with my professional obligations while providing clear guidance about the right course of action, despite its potential costs. The development of courage necessary for taking action that would fundamentally alter family relationships and social dynamics required extensive psychological preparation and moral reinforcement through careful examination of the principles that defined my character and determined my responses to ethical challenges. The recognition that continued silence would constitute complicity in ongoing crimes and betrayals created moral urgency that overcame concerns about timing, family loyalty, and social consequences. The choice to act became not a matter of preference, but rather an obligation that reflected my commitment to justice and protection of innocent parties. The preparation for confrontation required careful consideration of methodology and timing that would maximize the effectiveness of disclosure, while minimizing unnecessary harm to people who had not chosen to be involved in Victoria's deceptive behavior or James's criminal activities. The internal conflict resolution process involved accepting that some relationships and opportunities would be lost regardless of my actions, but that the integrity required for maintaining self-respect and professional credibility demanded commitment to truth and justice, even when such commitment created personal costs and social complications. The final decision to proceed with disclosure emerged from the recognition that the alternative, continued concealment of criminal behavior and personal betrayal, would represent a fundamental abandonment of the values and principles that defined my character and guided my professional career. The moral courage required for taking action aligned with the ethical framework that had always governed my approach to difficult decisions and challenging circumstances. As the wedding week arrived, the internal conflict had resolved into clear understanding that my obligation to protect Daniel's interests and ensure that truth prevailed over deception required disclosure of my discoveries, regardless of the personal and family costs that would inevitably follow. The question that remained was not whether to act, but rather how to manage the revelation in ways that would serve justice while preserving whatever relationships and opportunities could be maintained through honest communication and principled behavior. The escalation of circumstances that would ultimately force my confrontation with Victoria began during the final week before the wedding, when multiple converging events created a cascade of pressure that made continued concealment impossible to maintain. The carefully orchestrated timeline of wedding preparations, combined with unexpected developments in Daniel's business situation and Victoria's increasingly reckless behavior, created perfect conditions for the explosive revelation that would forever alter our family dynamics. The first critical development occurred on Monday morning when Daniel received notification from their primary streaming platform partner that final contract execution required updated financial statements and partnership documentation before the anticipated Thursday signing ceremony. This requirement represented standard industry practice for significant distribution agreements, but the timing created immediate pressure to resolve the financial irregularities I had discovered in their business records. Daniel's request for my assistance in preparing the required documentation placed me in the impossible position of either revealing James's fraudulent activities immediately or allowing my brother to submit false financial statements to a major corporation, creating potential legal liability that could destroy his career prospects permanently. The streaming platform's due diligence requirements would inevitably uncover the same discrepancies I had identified, making discovery of the financial misconduct unavoidable regardless of my actions. The documentation review revealed that James's fraudulent expenses had escalated significantly during recent months, with Strategic Media Solutions receiving payments totaling nearly $15,000 during the 8 weeks preceding the wedding. This acceleration suggested either desperation to extract maximum value before anticipated exposure or confidence that the approaching wedding celebration would provide sufficient distraction to prevent detailed scrutiny of business finances. The most damaging discovery involved a series of wire transfers from the production company's operating account to a personal account controlled by James, disguised as equipment purchases for their upcoming project but actually representing direct theft of partnership assets. These transactions occurred without Daniel's knowledge or authorization, violating both their partnership agreement and applicable laws governing business financial management. The evidence of escalating financial crimes created urgent necessity for immediate action to prevent additional losses, while protecting Daniel from potential legal liability as an unknowing participant in fraudulent business practices. The streaming platform's contract requirements meant that continued concealment would result in Daniel submitting false documents to sophisticated entertainment industry lawyers, who would certainly identify the irregularities during their review process. Tuesday's developments intensified the pressure when Victoria's increasingly erratic behavior began attracting attention from other family members and wedding vendors, who were attempting to finalize arrangements for the approaching celebration. Her emotional volatility and distracted demeanor during crucial planning meetings created concerns about her ability to manage the complex logistics that required her coordination and decision-making authority. The most significant incident occurred during the final catering meeting, when Victoria became visibly agitated upon learning that James would be arriving late to the rehearsal dinner due to what he described as urgent business obligations. Her reaction seemed disproportionate to the minor scheduling adjustment, particularly given that James's presence was not essential for the dinner planning process, but her emotional response created uncomfortable tension that required explanation to the catering staff and other family members present. Isabella approached me privately after the catering meeting to express concern about Victoria's behavior and to inquire whether family stress or health issues might be affecting her emotional stability. Isabella's medical training had taught her to recognize signs of psychological distress, and she was genuinely worried about Victoria's well-being, while also concerned about potential disruption to the wedding celebration that represented the culmination of months of careful planning. My conversation with Isabella created another moral dilemma, because her direct question about Victoria's condition required either dishonest deflection or partial revelation of information that could help her understand the situation while preparing her for potential complications. Isabella's professional background and personal maturity suggested she could handle difficult information responsibly, but sharing details about the investigation would violate the confidentiality I had maintained throughout the discovery process. Wednesday brought the most challenging development when my father requested a private meeting to discuss his growing concerns about Victoria's recent behavior and to seek my perspective as someone with professional experience analyzing patterns of deceptive conduct. His request indicated that Victoria's attempts to conceal her affair were becoming less effective, creating observable changes in her demeanor and activities that were raising questions among people who knew her well. The conversation with my father revealed that he had noticed unexplained absences, secretive phone conversations, and changes in Victoria's emotional patterns that were causing him significant anxiety about their relationship. His business experience had taught him to recognize signs of deception, but his emotional investment in their marriage was creating cognitive dissonance that prevented him from acknowledging the obvious implications of Victoria's behavioral changes. My father's direct request for my professional assessment of Victoria's behavior created the most difficult ethical challenge of the entire investigation, because honesty would immediately expose the affair while potentially causing him serious emotional and health consequences. His cardiovascular condition and recent stress-related medical issues made him particularly vulnerable to the shock of learning about Victoria's betrayal, creating genuine concerns about the physical impact of revelation. However, my father's right to accurate information about his marriage and financial security took precedence over concerns about his emotional comfort, particularly given that continued deception was causing him obvious psychological distress while exposing him to potential financial liability through Victoria's relationship with James. The duty to protect him from ongoing harm required honest communication about the situation despite its potential consequences. The convergence of these various pressure points created circumstances where multiple family members were independently approaching the same conclusions about Victoria's deceptive behavior, making coordinated revelation more feasible, while reducing the isolation I had experienced throughout the investigation process. The recognition that others shared my concerns validated my observations while providing potential allies for managing the confrontation and its aftermath. Thursday morning brought final confirmation that disclosure could no longer be delayed when James attempted to pressure Daniel into signing additional financial agreements that would have expanded his access to partnership assets while further obscuring the fraudulent activities already documented in their business records. The proposed agreements contained provisions that would have made detection of his crimes more difficult, while increasing his ability to extract additional funds before anticipated exposure. Daniel's instinctive reluctance to sign the agreements without thorough review provided the opening I needed to reveal the financial irregularities I had discovered, while explaining the investigation methods that had uncovered the evidence. His initial shock and anger upon learning about James's systematic theft created immediate understanding of the necessity for legal action, while generating support for exposing the personal relationship that had facilitated the business crimes. The revelation to Daniel about James's financial misconduct naturally led to questions about my investigation methods and the scope of information I had gathered during the discovery process. His legal training enabled him to appreciate the thoroughness of my documentation while recognizing the implications of evidence that extended beyond simple business fraud into personal relationships that affected multiple family members. Daniel's response to learning about Victoria's affair with James demonstrated the emotional maturity and principled character that had always defined his approach to difficult situations. His primary concern focused on protecting Isabella from unnecessary exposure to family scandal, while ensuring that appropriate legal action was taken to recover stolen funds and prevent additional crimes. The decision to coordinate our approach to managing the revelations created strategic advantages, while ensuring that family members would receive consistent information from trusted sources, rather than discovering the situation through rumor or media coverage. Daniel's agreement to support disclosure of both the financial crimes and personal betrayal reflected his commitment to truth and justice, despite the personal costs he would incur through loss of his business partnership. Friday's rehearsal dinner provided the final test of our family's ability to maintain normal appearances, while preparing for the confrontation that would occur during Saturday's wedding celebration. Victoria's behavior during the dinner demonstrated increasing anxiety and defensiveness that suggested awareness of potential exposure, while James's attempts to appear relaxed and celebratory felt forced and artificial to anyone observing carefully. The interactions between Victoria and James during the rehearsal dinner revealed their relationship dynamic more clearly than any previous observation, confirming the emotional intimacy and coordinated behavior that characterized their affair. Their attempts to maintain appropriate distance while communicating through subtle signals and meaningful glances created obvious evidence that would be apparent to anyone who understood the nature of their relationship. The evening concluded with Daniel and me finalizing our strategy for managing Saturday's events in ways that would minimize disruption to the wedding celebration while ensuring that justice was served and truth prevailed over deception. The plan required careful timing and coordination to prevent Victoria and James from coordinating their responses or attempting to flee before facing consequences for their actions. The rising tension had created circumstances where revelation became inevitable regardless of our specific actions, as multiple family members and business associates were independently discovering evidence of the deceptive behavior that could no longer be concealed through careful management and strategic distraction. The wedding celebration would provide the public forum, where truth would finally emerge from the shadows where it had been hidden through months of careful investigation and moral struggle. The catalyst event that would transform months of careful investigation into public confrontation began at precisely 4:47 p.m. on Saturday, during the cocktail hour preceding Daniel and Isabella's wedding reception at the Grandview estate. The elegant terrace overlooked manicured gardens, where 500 guests mingled beneath string lights and flowering arbors, creating the perfect backdrop for what should have been an evening of celebration and joy. I had positioned myself strategically near the main entrance to the reception hall, monitoring the arrival of guests while maintaining visual contact with both Victoria and James as they navigated their separate social obligations. The afternoon ceremony had proceeded flawlessly, with Daniel and Isabella exchanging vows that reflected their genuine love and commitment, while their families and friends witnessed the beginning of their married life together. Victoria had performed her maternal duties during the ceremony with apparent grace and composure, though I noticed subtle signs of tension in her posture and facial expressions that suggested underlying anxiety about maintaining her carefully constructed facade. Her interactions with other family members appeared normal to casual observers, but her frequent glances toward James revealed the emotional strain of concealing their relationship during such a significant family celebration. James had fulfilled his role as groomsman appropriately, participating in the traditional wedding party activities while maintaining professional distance from Victoria that would not attract attention from guests who were unaware of their personal involvement. His behavior during the ceremony and initial reception activities demonstrated the same calculated charm and social awareness that had enabled him to integrate himself into our family's social circle while systematically defrauding Daniel's business partnership. The specific incident that would trigger the confrontation occurred when Victoria approached me near the reception entrance, with what appeared to be a routine request for assistance with coordinating the evening's activities. Her demeanor seemed relaxed and maternal as she asked me to help ensure that certain elderly relatives were properly seated and comfortable during the dinner service that would begin within the hour. However, as Victoria moved closer to deliver these instructions, I noticed that she carried with her a small evening purse that contained items that immediately captured my professional attention. The purse was partially open, revealing the corner of a hotel room keycard and what appeared to be a handwritten note that bore James's distinctive handwriting style that I had observed on numerous business documents during my investigation. The presence of these items provided concrete physical evidence of Victoria's ongoing affair with James, confirming that their relationship continued actively even during Daniel's wedding celebration. The hotel keycard suggested that they had arranged to meet privately later that evening, demonstrating a level of calculated disrespect for family occasions that exceeded even my previous understanding of their behavioral patterns. My recognition of the evidence in Victoria's purse must have been apparent through my facial expression or body language, because her demeanor shifted immediately from casual friendliness to defensive wariness. She seemed to realize that I had observed something significant, though she could not determine the extent of my knowledge or the implications of my discovery. The moment of mutual recognition created electric tension between us, as Victoria understood that her careful concealment had been compromised, while I realized that the months of secret investigation were about to transition into direct confrontation. The bustling activity of the cocktail reception continued around us, but our interaction had become isolated within a bubble of awareness that felt separate from the celebration surrounding us. Victoria's response to this realization demonstrated the calculated ruthlessness that had enabled her to maintain her deception for nearly 2 years, while systematically betraying family trust and loyalty. Rather than attempting to deflect suspicion or create plausible explanations for the evidence I had observed, she immediately shifted into aggressive offense designed to intimidate me into silence and submission. Her voice dropped to a harsh whisper that carried unmistakable threat despite the elegant social setting and her outward appearance of maternal concern. She informed me that any attempt to disrupt the wedding celebration with unfounded accusations or malicious gossip would result in serious consequences for my relationship with the family and my professional reputation within the community. The specific language Victoria used revealed her sophisticated understanding of social dynamics and her confidence in her ability to manipulate family loyalties and community perceptions to protect herself from exposure. She referenced my history of difficult relationships with family members, suggesting that any accusations I might make would be dismissed as jealousy or vindictiveness rather than legitimate concerns about her conduct. Victoria's attempt at intimidation included veiled threats about her influence within the business and social networks where I maintained professional relationships, implying that she possessed the connections and credibility necessary to damage my forensic accounting career if I chose to challenge her authority or expose information that could embarrass the family. These threats revealed the extent to which Victoria had calculated the risks and benefits of her affair with James, developing contingency plans for managing potential exposure while maintaining confidence in her ability to control family narratives and social perceptions. Her willingness to threaten family relationships and professional opportunities demonstrated complete commitment to preserving her deception, regardless of the costs to other family members. My response to Victoria's threats reflected the moral courage and professional integrity that had developed throughout months of investigation and ethical struggle. Rather than retreating from confrontation or accepting her intimidation tactics, I calmly informed her that her behavior had already caused sufficient harm to family members who deserved protection from continued exploitation and betrayal. The conversation escalated rapidly as Victoria realized that her usual methods of social manipulation and emotional intimidation would not be effective in preventing exposure of her affair and its consequences for family relationships. Her desperation became apparent through increasingly aggressive language and behavior that attracted attention from nearby guests who began observing our interaction with growing concern. James appeared at Victoria's side during this escalating confrontation, apparently summoned by some prearranged signal or simply drawn by the obvious tension that was developing between us. His arrival intensified the dramatic potential of the situation, while providing additional confirmation of their coordinated efforts to manage and conceal their relationship even during family celebrations. The presence of both Victoria and James created the opportunity for comprehensive confrontation that would address both the personal betrayal of the affair and the financial crimes that had systematically damaged Daniel's business interests. The convergence of these issues in a single moment provided the catalyst for revelations that would expose the full scope of their deceptive behavior to family members and friends who had trusted them. James's attempt to defuse the situation through charm and misdirection demonstrated the same manipulative skills that had enabled him to gain Daniel's trust while stealing partnership assets. His approach focused on portraying the tension as a misunderstanding between family members, rather than a legitimate confrontation about serious misconduct that threatened multiple people's interests and security. However, James's presence also provided the opportunity to address the financial irregularities directly, while demonstrating the connection between his business crimes and personal relationship with Victoria. The evidence I had gathered about strategic media solutions and the diverted partnership funds could be presented immediately to establish the credibility of my accusations while showing the systematic nature of his deceptive practices. The confrontation reached its critical turning point when Victoria, recognizing that her intimidation tactics had failed and that exposure of her affair was becoming inevitable, made the decision that would forever alter the trajectory of the evening's events. Her calculation that physical aggression might succeed where verbal threats had failed represented a fundamental miscalculation about appropriate responses to legitimate challenges about unethical behavior. The slap that Victoria delivered to my face occurred in full view of approximately 30 wedding guests who were mingling within the immediate vicinity of our conversation. The sound of the impact carried clearly across the terrace area, causing conversations to pause and heads to turn toward our location, as people attempted to understand what had just occurred during what should have been a joyful family celebration. The physical assault provided the unmistakable catalyst that transformed private family conflict into public spectacle, while creating moral justification for immediate and comprehensive revelation of all information I had gathered during months of investigation. Victoria's decision to resort to violence demonstrated her desperation, while providing clear evidence of her willingness to harm family members who threatened to expose her deceptive behavior. The stunned silence that followed the slap created perfect conditions for the revelations that would expose 20 years of carefully constructed lies to the 500 guests who had gathered to celebrate Daniel and Isabella's wedding. The catalyst event had occurred. The point of no return had been reached, and the truth that had been hidden in shadows was about to emerge into the bright lights of public scrutiny and judgment. The transformation from secret investigation to public confrontation was complete, and the consequences that would follow would test every relationship, challenge every assumption, and reveal the true character of every person involved in the dramatic events that were about to unfold before an audience that had expected nothing more complicated than wedding cake and dancing beneath the stars. The aftermath of Victoria's slap created a suspended moment of absolute stillness that seemed to halt time itself across the elegant terrace of the Grandview estate. The sound of her hand connecting with my face had carried with crystalline clarity through the evening air, penetrating conversations and drawing the attention of guests who turned toward our location with expressions of shock and confusion that reflected their inability to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The physical impact of the assault was less significant than its symbolic meaning, and the moral clarity it provided regarding my obligations to reveal the truth that had been concealed through months of careful deception. Victoria's decision to resort to violence demonstrated her desperation, while simultaneously providing unassailable justification for comprehensive disclosure of information that would expose both her personal betrayal and James's systematic financial crimes. The silence that followed the slap extended for perhaps 10 seconds, though it felt substantially longer as I processed the implications of what had occurred while observing the shocked faces of family members and friends who struggled to understand how such behavior could emerge during what should have been a celebration of love and commitment between Daniel and Isabella. My father appeared at my side almost immediately, having witnessed the assault from his position near the bar where he had been conversing with Isabella's parents about their shared experiences as professionals who had built successful careers while maintaining strong family relationships. His expression reflected genuine bewilderment as he attempted to reconcile Victoria's violent behavior with the composed social persona she had maintained throughout their marriage. Daniel materialized within moments, his protective instincts as my younger brother overriding his responsibilities as the groom whose wedding celebration was being disrupted by family conflict that threatened to overshadow the joy and significance of his marriage to Isabella. His immediate concern focused on my physical well-being, while his trained legal mind began processing the implications of what he had observed. Isabella approached with the professional composure that characterized her medical training, her physician instincts activated by the potential for injury, while her personal concern reflected her growing attachment to our family and her investment in maintaining relationships that would affect her future happiness as Daniel's wife. The convergence of these family members created natural audience for the revelations that could no longer be postponed or managed through private discussion and gradual disclosure. Victoria's public assault had transformed the situation from internal family matter into spectacle that demanded immediate explanation and resolution before the broader wedding audience who deserved understanding of what they had witnessed. Victoria's immediate response to the attention she had attracted demonstrated her recognition that intimidation tactics had failed catastrophically, while creating circumstances that made concealment of her affair impossible to maintain. Her attempt to regain control of the narrative focused on portraying her behavior as justified response to provocation, rather than acknowledgement of the systematic deception that had characterized her conduct for nearly 2 years. James positioned himself strategically behind Victoria in apparent gesture of support, though his body language suggested growing awareness that their carefully managed concealment was collapsing rapidly under scrutiny that would inevitably expose both personal and financial misconduct that could result in criminal prosecution and social disgrace. The point of no return had been reached through Victoria's own actions rather than strategic decisions on my part, creating moral authority for revelations that would serve justice while protecting innocent family members from continued exploitation. The physical assault provided clear evidence of her willingness to harm people who threatened her deception while demonstrating character traits that justified public exposure of her betrayal. My response to the immediate situation required balancing multiple competing considerations, including protection of Daniel and Isabella's wedding celebration, concern for my father's emotional well-being, respect for the hundreds of guests who had invested time and resources to attend the event, and obligation to ensure that truth prevailed over continued deception and manipulation. The decision to proceed with comprehensive revelation reflected recognition that partial disclosure would create more problems than complete transparency, particularly given that Victoria's violent behavior had already disrupted the celebration, while raising questions that could only be answered through honest explanation of the circumstances that had led to the confrontation. The strategic advantage created by Victoria's assault included moral authority that would make audience reception of difficult information more favorable, while providing clear justification for actions that might otherwise appear vindictive or inappropriate for family celebration. Her decision to resort to violence had eliminated ambiguity about appropriate responses to her behavior. The preparation for public disclosure required rapid mental organization of evidence and narrative structure that would communicate complex information clearly, while maintaining focus on protection of innocent parties rather than punishment of guilty individuals. The forensic accounting training that had enabled discovery of the deceptive behavior also provided skills for presenting findings effectively to audiences who lacked technical expertise. The audience that had gathered around our location included family members who deserved complete information about relationships that affected their own circumstances, business associates who needed understanding of financial irregularities that could impact their professional connections, and social acquaintances whose support networks included people whose behavior they should evaluate based on accurate rather than deceptive information. The recognition that continued concealment would constitute betrayal of trust, placed in me by family members who had shared their concerns and sought professional advice, created additional moral pressure for immediate disclosure, despite potential consequences for relationships and social standing that had been built over decades of careful cultivation. The transformation from private investigator to public advocate required psychological adjustment that drew upon professional experience testifying in legal proceedings, where complex financial information must be communicated clearly to judges and juries, whose decisions would determine distribution of substantial assets and resolution of disputed claims. The courage necessary for public confrontation emerged from months of investigation and moral struggle that had strengthened conviction about appropriate responses to systematic deception and exploitation of family relationships. The preparation period had provided time for psychological development that would enable effective action when circumstances demanded immediate response. The support provided by Daniel's presence created confidence that revelation would serve constructive purposes, rather than merely satisfying personal desires for vindication or revenge. His legal training and professional ethics aligned with my own commitment to justice, while his family relationships provided motivation for protecting innocent parties from continued harm. The broader implications of public disclosure included potential media attention and social scrutiny that would affect multiple family members and business relationships, but these consequences appeared less significant than continued protection of criminal behavior and personal betrayal that were causing ongoing harm to people who deserved truthful information about their circumstances. The final decision to proceed with comprehensive revelation emerged from recognition that Victoria's assault had created perfect conditions for disclosure, while providing moral authority that would maximize audience receptivity to difficult information. The point of no return had been reached through her actions, rather than strategic planning, creating natural opportunity for truth to emerge. The moment of commitment occurred when I stepped forward to address the gathered audience, while drawing upon months of preparation and professional experience to deliver information that would forever alter family relationships and social dynamics within our community. The transformation from secret investigation to public revelation was complete, and the consequences that would follow represented natural outcomes of choices made by individuals whose behavior had created necessity for exposure. The psychological shift from observer to participant reflected character development that had occurred throughout the investigation process, strengthening moral courage while providing skills necessary for effective communication of complex information under challenging circumstances. The point of no return represented not merely tactical decision but fundamental commitment to values and principles that defined personal integrity and professional responsibility. The anticipation of audience response created natural anxiety, tempered by confidence that truth would ultimately serve everyone's best interests, including individuals whose behavior had created necessity for disclosure. The revelation that would follow represented opportunity for authentic relationships based on honest information rather than continued deception that served only narrow interests of guilty parties. The preparation for speaking to 500 wedding guests about family betrayal and financial crimes required drawing upon every aspect of professional training, while maintaining focus on protection of innocent parties and promotion of justice, rather than personal vindication or social revenge that would diminish moral authority of the disclosure. The moment I began speaking to the assembled wedding guests marked the culmination of months of investigation and moral struggle, transforming carefully documented evidence into public testimony that would expose systematic deception while protecting innocent family members from continued exploitation. The clarity of purpose that emerged from Victoria's assault provided the confidence necessary to address 500 people with information that would fundamentally alter their understanding of relationships and character judgments they had maintained for years. My opening statement established the context for revelations that would challenge assumptions about family loyalty and social respectability, while demonstrating the professional methodology that had uncovered evidence of both personal betrayal and financial crimes. The forensic accounting background that had enabled discovery of the deceptive behavior also provided credibility with audience members who recognized the thoroughness and objectivity required for such investigations. The systematic presentation of evidence began with documentation of Victoria's affair with James Caldwell, including detailed timeline analysis that demonstrated coordination between their personal relationship and his systematic theft of partnership assets from Daniel's documentary production company. The chronological correlation between romantic involvement and financial crimes provided clear evidence of conspiracy that extended beyond simple infidelity into criminal territory. The financial evidence received comprehensive explanation through accessible language that enabled non-technical audience members to understand the sophisticated methods James had employed to divert partnership funds while concealing his activities from Daniel and potential investors. The Strategic Media Solutions Shell Corporation represented particularly egregious example of premeditated fraud that demonstrated calculated intent to steal rather than simple mismanagement of business resources. The documentation of expense manipulation and unauthorized wire transfers provided concrete proof of criminal activity that exceeded $47,000 in verified losses, with additional suspicious transactions indicating potentially larger scope of financial misconduct that would require forensic audit to quantify completely. The systematic nature of the theft demonstrated professional-level fraud planning that had been executed over 18 months. The revelation of communication records and behavioral observations that confirmed the affair created a comprehensive picture of deception that had affected multiple family relationships, while enabling financial crimes that threatened Daniel's professional future and personal financial security. The evidence demonstrated coordination between Victoria and James that made both parties complicit in systematic betrayal of family trust and business partnerships. The audience response to these revelations reflected the shock and disbelief that typically accompany exposure of long-term deception, particularly when such behavior involves individuals who had maintained reputations for integrity and social responsibility within their professional and personal communities. The comprehensive nature of the evidence made denial impossible, while the professional presentation established credibility that prevented dismissal as family conflict or personal vendetta. Victoria's immediate reaction to public exposure demonstrated the desperate calculation that had characterized her behavior throughout the affair, as she attempted to minimize the significance of revelations while challenging the legitimacy of investigation methods that had uncovered her systematic deception. Her defensive responses provided additional confirmation of guilt, while revealing character traits that justified public disclosure of information that affected multiple innocent parties. James's response focused on deflection and misdirection, rather than substantive challenge to documented evidence, demonstrating awareness that forensic accounting discoveries could withstand legal scrutiny while creating criminal liability that extended beyond civil partnership disputes into territory requiring criminal prosecution. His attempt to minimize financial irregularities as bookkeeping errors reflected recognition that comprehensive audit would reveal additional misconduct. The family members present during the revelation experienced varying degrees of shock and anger as they processed implications of systematic deception that had affected their relationships and potentially their financial security. My father's reaction reflected particular devastation as 20 years of marriage revealed itself as partially fraudulent, while his trust and emotional investment had been exploited for purposes that benefited his wife's romantic relationship with another man. Daniel's response demonstrated the professional composure and analytical thinking that characterized his legal training, as he immediately began considering implications for business operations, legal liability, and recovery of stolen assets, while managing emotional impact of discovering that his trusted partner had systematically betrayed both personal and professional relationships. Isabella's reaction reflected her medical training and natural empathy, as she focused on providing emotional support for family members while processing information that would affect her entrance into family dynamics that had been fundamentally altered by exposure of long-concealed deception. Her professional background enabled appreciation of investigation methodology, while her personal investment in family relationships created concern about long-term consequences. The broader audience of wedding guests included business associates, professional colleagues, and social acquaintances whose reactions would determine community response to revelations, while affecting future relationships and opportunities for all parties involved in the exposed misconduct. The diversity of perspectives represented in the audience ensured comprehensive evaluation of evidence from multiple professional and personal viewpoints. The professional validation of investigation methods occurred naturally as guests with relevant expertise recognized thoroughness and objectivity of documentation, while appreciating ethical considerations that had guided disclosure decisions. The forensic accounting approach received particular recognition from business professionals who understood complexity of financial fraud detection and prevention. The social implications of public revelation included immediate consequences for charitable organizations and community institutions, where Victoria had maintained leadership positions based on reputation and social standing that had been fundamentally compromised by exposure of systematic deception and associated financial crimes. The charitable community would require evaluation of potential impact on fundraising and governance activities. The legal ramifications began emerging immediately as guests with legal backgrounds recognized criminal nature of documented financial misconduct, while appreciating civil implications for partnership dissolution and asset recovery that would require professional legal representation and potentially lengthy litigation processes. The business consequences extended beyond immediate partnership between Daniel and James to include relationships with investors, distribution partners, and industry colleagues whose confidence in business operations would be affected by exposure of systematic financial fraud that had been concealed through sophisticated deception methods. The personal relationships affected by revelations included extended family members, longtime friends, and social connections that had been built on assumptions about character and integrity that proved fundamentally inaccurate when subjected to professional investigation and objective analysis of behavioral patterns over extended time periods. The transformation of wedding celebration into forum for justice demonstrated how truth ultimately serves broader community interests, despite short-term disruption and emotional pain that accompany exposure of systematic deception. The wedding venue provided natural gathering of stakeholders who deserved accurate information about relationships and character assessments that affected their own decision-making processes. The courage required for public disclosure reflected months of preparation and moral development that had strengthened conviction about appropriate responses to criminal behavior and personal betrayal that threatened innocent parties who lacked information necessary for protecting their own interests and making informed decisions about relationships and business partnerships. The professional integrity that guided revelation methodology ensured comprehensive documentation, while maintaining ethical standards that would withstand legal scrutiny and community evaluation of investigation techniques and disclosure decisions. The forensic accounting training provided framework for objective analysis, while personal relationships created motivation for protecting family members from continued exploitation. The conclusion of the revelation phase established foundation for accountability and justice while providing information necessary for informed decision-making by family members, business associates, and community leaders whose relationships had been affected by systematic deception that could no longer be concealed through careful management and social manipulation. The truth that emerged through professional investigation and principled disclosure served interests of justice while protecting innocent parties from continued harm, demonstrating how individual courage and professional competence can combine to expose wrongdoing while maintaining ethical standards that preserve personal integrity and community trust in accountability processes. The initial wave of shocked silence that followed my comprehensive revelation gave way to a complex array of reactions among the 500 wedding guests, ranging from immediate acceptance of documented evidence to defensive skepticism from individuals whose personal or professional relationships with Victoria and James created resistance to acknowledging the systematic deception that had been exposed through months of careful investigation. The skepticism emerged primarily from three distinct groups within the wedding audience, each presenting unique challenges that required tailored responses based on their specific concerns and motivations for questioning the validity of evidence that clearly demonstrated both personal betrayal and financial crimes. The professional methodology that had guided the investigation process provided framework for addressing these challenges, while maintaining credibility and focus on factual documentation rather than emotional appeals or personal accusations. The first category of skeptics included Victoria's longtime social associates and charitable organization colleagues who had developed personal relationships with her over many years and found the revelations fundamentally inconsistent with their understanding of her character and values. These individuals had witnessed Victoria's dedication to community service and philanthropic activities, creating cognitive dissonance when confronted with evidence of systematic deception and complicity in financial crimes that contradicted their personal experiences with her behavior. Margaret Wellington, the chairwoman of the Metropolitan Arts Foundation, where Victoria served as Vice President of Development, emerged as the most vocal representative of this skeptical group. Her challenge focused on questioning the timing and motivation for public disclosure during a family celebration, suggesting that personal grievances might have influenced the decision to expose private matters in such a dramatic fashion. Her concerns reflected genuine confusion about reconciling documented evidence with years of positive professional collaboration and personal friendship. My response to Margaret's concerns emphasized the professional standards that had guided both the investigation methodology and the disclosure decision, explaining how Victoria's public assault had created circumstances that made immediate revelation necessary for protecting innocent family members from continued exploitation. The forensic accounting principles that governed evidence collection and analysis ensured objectivity, while the timing reflected response to Victoria's own actions, rather than strategic planning for maximum dramatic impact. The documentation provided to address social skepticism included detailed timeline analysis that demonstrated systematic planning behind both the affair and financial crimes, showing coordination between personal and professional deception that extended far beyond momentary lapses in judgment or temporary relationship difficulties. The evidence revealed character traits and behavioral patterns that had been carefully concealed through sophisticated social manipulation and strategic relationship management. The second category of skeptics consisted of business associates and professional colleagues of James Caldwell, who had developed respect for his industry expertise and marketing capabilities, making them reluctant to accept evidence of systematic financial fraud without additional verification and professional analysis. These individuals understood the complexity of entertainment industry financial management and questioned whether apparent irregularities might represent legitimate business practices that had been misinterpreted through inappropriate application of traditional accounting standards. Robert Chen, a prominent entertainment attorney who had worked with James on previous projects, requested detailed examination of the Strategic Media Solutions documentation to verify claims about fraudulent expense reporting and unauthorized asset diversion. His legal background enabled appreciation of investigation methodology, while his professional relationship with James created natural bias toward finding alternative explanations for documented financial irregularities. The response to professional skepticism required comprehensive presentation of forensic evidence using industry-standard analysis techniques that demonstrated clear violations of partnership agreements and applicable laws governing business financial management. The shell corporation structure, unauthorized wire transfers, and systematic expense manipulation represented unambiguous criminal activity that could not be explained through legitimate business practices or alternative interpretation of financial regulations. The supporting documentation included bank records, corporate filings, and communication evidence that established deliberate intent to defraud rather than inadvertent violations resulting from complex business operations or accounting errors. The pattern of concealment and misdirection demonstrated sophisticated planning that exceeded simple bookkeeping mistakes or administrative oversights that might characterize legitimate business disputes. The third category of skeptics included family members and close personal friends who struggled with emotional implications of accepting evidence that would fundamentally alter their understanding of relationships they had valued and trusted for many years. These individuals faced psychological barriers to acknowledgement that created resistance despite clear documentation, as acceptance would require painful reassessment of personal judgment and relationship choices. Victoria's sister Catherine expressed particular difficulty accepting evidence of the affair, citing her knowledge of Victoria's previous commitment to family values and marriage vows that had been demonstrated through decades of apparently stable relationship with my father. Her emotional investment in maintaining positive family relationships created natural resistance to information that would require fundamental changes in family dynamics and social interactions. The approach to addressing emotional skepticism required sensitive communication that acknowledged legitimate concerns about family harmony, while emphasizing obligation to protect innocent parties from continued harm through systematic deception and financial exploitation. The evidence presentation focused on documented facts rather than emotional appeals, allowing family members to process information at their own pace, while ensuring access to complete documentation necessary for informed decision-making. The verification process established for addressing all categories of skepticism involved independent confirmation of key evidence through third-party sources that could not be influenced by family relationships or personal bias. The bank records, corporate documents, and communication evidence could be verified through official channels that provided objective confirmation of investigation findings, while eliminating questions about selective presentation or interpretation of ambiguous information. The professional credentials and investigation methodology received validation from audience members with relevant expertise who recognized thoroughness and objectivity of documentation, while appreciating ethical considerations that had guided both evidence collection and disclosure decisions. The forensic accounting approach provided credibility that withstood scrutiny from legal, business, and financial professionals present among the wedding guests. The systematic response to skeptical challenges demonstrated how comprehensive documentation and professional methodology could overcome emotional resistance and cognitive bias, while maintaining focus on factual evidence rather than personal accusations or vindictive motivations. The investigation quality enabled confident presentation of findings while providing foundation for any legal proceedings that might follow exposure of criminal financial misconduct. The transformation of skeptics into supporters occurred gradually, as additional evidence emerged through independent verification, and as the logical consistency of documented patterns became apparent through careful analysis. The professional presentation style and willingness to address concerns directly created credibility that overcame initial resistance while building consensus around need for accountability and justice. The broader implications of successfully addressing skepticism included establishment of community confidence in investigation findings, while creating foundation for appropriate legal and professional responses to documented misconduct. The verification process demonstrated commitment to accuracy and fairness that enhanced credibility while ensuring that subsequent actions would be based on solid evidence rather than speculation or personal bias. The courage required for maintaining professional standards while facing skeptical challenges reflected months of preparation and moral development that had strengthened conviction about appropriate responses to systematic deception and financial crimes. The ability to remain calm and factual while addressing emotional resistance demonstrated character development that enabled effective advocacy for innocent parties who had been victimized through exploitation of trust relationships. The success in overcoming skepticism established foundation for accountability processes while demonstrating how professional competence and moral courage could combine to expose wrongdoing despite resistance from individuals whose personal or professional interests were served by continued concealment of criminal behavior and systematic betrayal of family relationships. The transition from confronting skepticism to building meaningful support represented a critical phase in establishing accountability for the systematic deception and financial crimes that had been exposed during the wedding reception. The professional approach to evidence presentation and the comprehensive documentation that supported every claim began generating confidence among wedding guests who possessed relevant expertise to evaluate the investigation methodology and verify key findings through independent channels. The first significant ally to emerge from the audience was Thomas Richardson, a federal prosecutor who specialized in white-collar crime and had attended the wedding as a longtime family friend of Isabella's parents. His professional experience with financial fraud investigations enabled immediate recognition of the sophisticated methods James had employed to divert partnership assets, while concealing criminal activity through carefully constructed shell corporations and fraudulent expense reporting schemes. Richardson's public endorsement of investigation quality provided crucial credibility with other legal professionals present at the reception, while establishing foundation for potential criminal prosecution that would ensure appropriate consequences for documented financial crimes. His willingness to offer professional consultation regarding next steps demonstrated how authentic evidence could attract support from individuals whose expertise validated investigation findings and recommended appropriate legal responses. The legal validation created momentum that encouraged additional professionals to examine evidence more closely, while offering their own expertise to support accountability processes. Dr. Patricia Hawkins, a forensic psychiatrist who had observed Victoria's behavioral patterns during previous social interactions, provided professional perspective on psychological manipulation techniques that had enabled systematic deception over extended time periods. Dr. Hawkins explained how sophisticated manipulators often compartmentalize relationships to prevent discovery while maintaining different personas for various audiences, creating cognitive dissonance that makes exposure difficult for victims and observers to accept initially. Her professional insights helped family members understand how they had been systematically deceived while providing framework for recovery from betrayal trauma that would affect healing processes. The medical professional support expanded when Dr. James Liu, Isabella's colleague from the hospital where she practiced pediatric surgery, offered expertise in recognizing signs of financial abuse and emotional manipulation that often accompany systematic deception in family relationships. His professional training in identifying vulnerable populations provided valuable perspective on protecting innocent family members from continued exploitation. The business community representation among wedding guests included several individuals whose professional experience with partnership management and corporate governance enabled appreciation of investigation methodology while recognizing serious nature of documented financial irregularities. Marcus Williams, who served as chief financial officer for a major regional corporation, provided expert analysis of forensic evidence that confirmed criminal intent behind systematic asset diversion and fraudulent expense reporting. Williams' professional endorsement carried particular weight because his corporate position required expertise in detecting and preventing financial fraud, while maintaining fiduciary responsibility for protecting shareholder interests. His willingness to provide detailed analysis of investigation findings demonstrated how comprehensive documentation could withstand scrutiny from qualified professionals, while establishing credibility necessary for legal proceedings. The charitable organization community faced particular challenges in processing revelations about Victoria's systematic deception, given her prominent leadership roles and substantial fundraising contributions that had benefited multiple worthy causes. However, several board members present at the reception recognized obligation to protect organizational integrity while ensuring appropriate governance responses to leadership conduct that violated ethical standards and potentially created legal liability. Eleanor Mason, who served alongside Victoria on the Metropolitan Arts Foundation board, demonstrated remarkable courage in acknowledging concerns about financial management practices that had not received adequate oversight during Victoria's tenure as development vice president. Her willingness to support comprehensive audit of foundation accounts reflected commitment to organizational integrity, despite personal relationships that made such accountability measures emotionally difficult. The educational community's support emerged through connections with Daniel's documentary work on urban education reform, as several educators and administrators present at the reception recognized importance of protecting authentic advocacy efforts from association with individuals whose conduct undermined credibility and effectiveness of reform initiatives. Professor Angela Torres from the local university's education department offered expertise in media relations and crisis management that would help Daniel maintain professional relationships while distancing his legitimate advocacy work from scandal that could affect funding and collaboration opportunities. Her support demonstrated how professional networks could provide resources for recovery while ensuring continued progress toward worthy social goals. The social justice implications of the revelation attracted support from community leaders who recognized importance of accountability for individuals whose privileged positions enabled systematic exploitation of trust relationships. Reverend Michael Johnson, whose church had benefited from Victoria's fundraising efforts, acknowledged difficult but necessary obligation to evaluate leadership conduct while protecting organizational mission and integrity. Reverend Johnson's response demonstrated how moral leadership required difficult decisions about accountability, despite personal relationships and organizational benefits that created competing interests. His willingness to support appropriate consequences for documented misconduct provided moral authority that influenced other community leaders who faced similar decisions about balancing relationships with principles. The financial services community representation included estate planning attorneys and investment advisors whose professional obligations required recognition of fiduciary violations and potential criminal conduct that could affect client interests and professional relationships. Catherine Martinez, a trust and estate attorney, offered expertise in asset protection and recovery procedures that would be necessary for addressing financial damage caused by James's systematic theft. Martinez's professional support provided practical guidance for legal proceedings, while demonstrating how systematic documentation enabled effective recovery efforts despite sophisticated concealment methods that had been employed to hide criminal activity. Her willingness to provide pro bono consultation reflected professional commitment to justice, while recognizing serious nature of documented violations. The media relations challenges that would inevitably follow public exposure of family scandal attracted support from communication professionals who understood importance of managing narrative, while maintaining focus on accountability rather than sensationalism. Jennifer Walsh, a public relations executive, offered strategic guidance for protecting innocent family members while ensuring appropriate coverage of legal proceedings and accountability measures. Walsh's expertise in crisis communication provided valuable perspective on maintaining professional relationships and business opportunities, despite association with family scandal that could affect reputation and career prospects. Her support demonstrated how professional networks could provide resources for managing consequences while ensuring continued progress toward legitimate goals. The international business connections represented among wedding guests included individuals whose global perspective provided valuable context for understanding sophisticated financial fraud schemes, while appreciating investigation methodology that met international standards for evidence collection and analysis. Roberto Silva, who managed international partnerships for a multinational corporation, confirmed that investigation quality would withstand scrutiny in multiple legal jurisdictions. Silva's professional endorsement carried particular significance because his international experience provided credibility with law enforcement agencies that might become involved in prosecution efforts, while his business expertise validated financial analysis methods that had uncovered systematic criminal activity spanning multiple years and involving sophisticated concealment techniques. The technological expertise present among wedding guests included cybersecurity professionals and data analysts who could provide independent verification of digital evidence, while offering additional investigation capabilities that might uncover further evidence of systematic deception and financial crimes. David Park, a forensic technology consultant, offered resources for comprehensive digital forensic analysis. Park's technological expertise complemented traditional forensic accounting methods, while providing capabilities for investigating communication patterns and financial transactions that might reveal additional criminal activity requiring prosecution. His professional support demonstrated how contemporary investigation techniques could enhance traditional methods while maintaining legal standards necessary for successful prosecution efforts. The accumulation of professional support and expert validation created foundation for comprehensive accountability, while demonstrating how authentic evidence could generate community consensus around need for appropriate legal and social consequences. The willingness of respected professionals to offer expertise and resources reflected recognition that systematic deception and financial crimes required coordinated response from multiple disciplines and institutions. The professional validation and community support that emerged during the wedding reception created foundation for broader recognition of the investigation quality and its significance within legal, business, and social justice communities. The comprehensive documentation and ethical methodology that had guided the evidence collection process began attracting attention from institutions and organizations whose missions aligned with accountability and protection of innocent parties from systematic exploitation and financial crimes. The immediate recognition came from the State Bar Association's Ethics Committee, whose members had learned about the investigation through attorney Thomas Richardson's professional networks. The committee recognized the complex ethical considerations that had guided disclosure decisions, while appreciating thoroughness of documentation that would support legal proceedings and professional accountability measures for individuals whose conduct violated fiduciary obligations and criminal statutes. The Bar Association's interest reflected broader professional community recognition that systematic financial fraud within business partnerships represented serious threat to commercial relationships and legal standards governing fiduciary responsibility. The investigation methodology received particular attention because it demonstrated effective techniques for detecting sophisticated fraud schemes that had been designed to avoid traditional audit procedures and regulatory oversight mechanisms. The forensic accounting professional community provided additional recognition through the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, whose regional chapter invited detailed presentation of investigation techniques and evidence collection methods that had successfully uncovered systematic criminal activity despite sophisticated concealment efforts. The professional development opportunity reflected recognition of investigation quality while providing platform for sharing expertise with colleagues facing similar challenges. The invitation to present investigation findings to fraud examination professionals created opportunity to demonstrate how traditional forensic accounting methods could be enhanced through careful behavioral analysis and systematic documentation of relationship patterns that often accompany financial crimes. The presentation would contribute to professional knowledge while establishing credibility within specialized field that valued thorough methodology and objective analysis. The academic recognition emerged through business school faculty members who recognized case study potential in investigation that had successfully detected sophisticated partnership fraud, while navigating complex ethical considerations regarding family relationships and professional obligations. Professor Elizabeth Harmon, whose forensic accounting courses had originally inspired the career path, requested detailed case analysis for educational purposes. The academic interest reflected recognition that investigation combined technical expertise with ethical reasoning in ways that provided valuable learning opportunities for students preparing for careers in forensic accounting and fraud examination. The educational value extended beyond technical methods to include moral reasoning and professional responsibility considerations that characterized effective investigation practices. The media attention began developing through business journalism community recognition of investigation significance for understanding contemporary fraud schemes and their detection methods. The systematic approach to evidence collection and professional presentation of findings created compelling narrative that illustrated effective techniques for protecting innocent parties from sophisticated financial crimes. The media coverage maintained focus on investigation methodology and accountability measures rather than sensational aspects of family conflict, reflecting professional approach to disclosure that had prioritized protection of innocent parties while ensuring appropriate consequences for documented misconduct. The responsible journalism approach supported broader recognition of investigation quality while avoiding exploitation of family circumstances for entertainment purposes. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.